Alright YouTube, so we are back of course with some Final Fantasy VII Remake news. So we have a couple articles to look at today, one from Square Enix themselves, and one that's posted over on the PlayStation website. Something I want to touch on really quickly that I forgot to mention in yesterday's video is in that interview with Tetsuya Nomura with Famitsu that DualShockers translated, he actually talks about vehicles being in the game. And what he says is the game is quite big, there are many places you can visit, and you can even move around using vehicles at some points. The thing is, we're not entirely sure what this means. Does it mean that we have free roam driving similar to Final Fantasy 15? Or the fact that he says you can use vehicles at some points, is this referencing when you ride the motorcycles and you're running away from Shinra guys? But I do think, and it is just my speculation, that since he's talking about the size of the game at that point about it being a quite big game, and then goes on to talk about how we can drive vehicles, I think it'll be a little bit of somewhat free roam driving, but in set areas. Anyways, on to today's video. So the first article we're going to look at is over on PlayStation.com, and it's an interview with Yoshinori Kitase and Naoki Hamaguchi, kind of going over and discussing rebuilding the city of Midgar, and kind of breaking down that intro movie we got. So the first thing to talk about is the wasteland around Midgar, and they say the opening scene is completely different from the original, giving us a bird's eye view, literally, of the area surrounding the city, one that's devoid of life. I ask if this is an early nod to one of the story's central themes, planetary devastation due to industrialization. Kitase acknowledges that was one reason. We didn't want to go over the top with it, says the producer, but there's very much the nuance that Midgar is damaging the surrounding area. I thought it was an interesting quote because, for me personally, it's not nuanced that Midgar is destroying the surrounding area, but then again, I know the story of Final Fantasy VII. For the newcomers, it might be very subtle. But also in the same intro movie, they have a shot dedicated to showing you a plant dying, so I don't think it's really all that subtle. They then talk about using the expanded universe as reference, so they say, we did refer to Advent Children and other previous series work when rebuilding Midgar. But one of the main things we actually set out to redo was the scale of the city itself. The original wasn't that realistic if you consider the size of the individual buildings and how big they were in comparison to the overall city. It was quite condensed. We really set out to make Midgar realistic. The size between the buildings, the density, that's one of the big things we set out to change. The main reason why this is worth talking about is because the expanded universe has been a hot topic for this game for a long time. It's nice to know that they're using that as sort of a reference, because games like Crisis Core, Before Crisis, even Dirge of Cerberus add new areas and new elements to the world of Final Fantasy VII. And actually, even in the demo itself, there's already a hint towards Crisis Core with the poster in the train station for Benora White Apple Juice. Benora is a town that's exclusively in Crisis Core. It's the hometown of Angel in Genesis. And according to the Ultimania Guide, Benora exists in the Wutai area. Since they're referencing the town of Benora with this poster in the demo, that means that it's canonical to the remake project as well. So that means we'll get to go to Benora at some point in time. Now, whether or not that's the second, third, or 15th game, who knows, but we know that this town exists now. I personally love this. I love knowing that they're going to be using things from the expanded universe. So if you've played these games or watched the movies, things like that, you're probably going to recognize things around the world. As for making the city bigger, more realistic, they actually touch on this with the next piece. So does that mean the studio has a fully designed topographical map of Midgar? Sort of, according to the co-director. We haven't done it all to the same quality or same level of detail as the actual areas you get to visit in the game, but we have mapped out the entire city, what's in each of those areas. But that hasn't stopped the team answering an important theoretical question. Could the city's design work for real? You know the structure of Midgar, you have the big central pillar, and each sector is supported by its own sub-pillar, continues Hamaguchi. We worked out the right size and construction, how big those pillars would need to be to physically support the weight of the plate on top of them. Also the honeycomb structure of the pillars, and where the tunnels would have to go for it to still work as a physical structure. That has all been mapped out, and we understand quite a lot of detail about the realities of how Midgar would be constructed as a city. Now, we already did an entire dedicated video to this, but if you have that high-resolution image still, they're right in saying that they mapped out the entire city, as we talked about previously. You can zoom in on every damn street that they have and everything. Also, there's the honeycomb thing they're talking about right here. But I love that they're taking the design of Midgar seriously. They're not just recreating a video game city. They're making it as realistic as possible to the scale of the city, as big as it should be, but also down to the pillars supporting the plates, how big those would need to be able to hold the plates up. They then go on to talk about the everyday lives of people of Midgar. They say, we really want to show the everyday lives of Midgar's citizens, partly to show how they lived in this massive city powered by Mako energy, how and when they'd be using it to tell that aspect of the story. The original version went straight into the bombing mission. We wanted that feeling that things were already underway, you were in the middle of the action. Yet if you immediately went from there into the panic caused by the bombing mission afterwards, you wouldn't understand the impact it had on the inhabitants' everyday lives before that event interrupted them. That's why we started with this domestic kind of scene. I'm so happy that they described it this way because it adds more weight to this intro movie. You're just seeing regular people, right? People driving to work, construction workers, kids riding their bikes, people just driving and walking around the streets of Midgar, and right after this, we're doing the bombing mission, right? We're blowing up a reactor, and it's going to affect these people's lives. We've actually already seen the members of Avalanche seeing the after effects of blowing up the reactor with the Symphonic Reunion trailer.
This couldn't have been us. But what if it was?
What's done is done.
And we should be questioning what we're doing. I mean, we're going into this location and blowing it up. It's probably going to kill some people. And for me, that's personally the things that I found interesting from that article. There is still more to read if you want to, so of course it'll be linked in the description below. So on to the Square Enix article, which I found interesting because they actually talk about the events that take place after the first bombing mission, so it actually kind of segues off of what we just discussed. For the most part though, that opening part skews close to what fans will expect. Cloud and company get in, fight their way to the reactor, beat the bullets off a giant robot scorpion, and get out in the nick of time as the reactor explodes around them. But what happens after that? Well, as in the original game, the team splits up to reunite later, and Cloud wanders alone through the upper plate streets of Midgar. And what streets they are. This area drives home just how richly reimagined this iconic location really is. The streets are densely packed with detail, buildings tower around you, streetlights illuminate the scene with vivid color, every NPC is unique, and most have something to say as you get near. Despite the devastation around you, the place feels alive. They claim that every NPC is unique. I don't know if they mean in just this section or in the game as a whole, because that remains to be seen, and that is a bold claim, because you don't often get that in RPGs. And really just games in general. A lot of games, man, it's hard to design a unique character model and fill a world full of characters, right? But if we have generally completely unique NPCs, and most of them have something to say if you get near, it's going to really add to the immersion of this game. If you're anything like me, you'll probably take this section very slow, taking the time to really soak in the scale and atmosphere of this place. But think Cloud has an unexpected reunion with a figure that fans of the original Final Fantasy VII will instantly recognize. Suddenly, we're in exciting territory. This is new. And there's no dawdling now as a startled Cloud pursues the elusive figure through the streets and alleys. Although he loses sight of his target, he does eventually encounter a very familiar flower seller, almost said girl, Aerith. But she has problems of her own. She's surrounded by black wisps of something, which cause her to stumble and fall. Cloud's presence seems to drive them away, and they strike up a conversation, much as it did in the original game. So obviously the elusive figure is Sephiroth. This isn't really anything new here. We knew that he had a run-in with Sephiroth after the first bombing mission, but they go into more detail here, which is what I like. But something I did find interesting from this that is new information to me is that the Watchmen of Fate seem to only be pursuing Aerith, and Cloud showing up actually kind of scares them off. Rest assured that yes, Cloud still has an option of whether or not to buy a flower, and here's a fun fact. A grateful Aerith will now give it to him for free, rather than charge him a guild. This is actually some pretty good information, because I was wondering if this was still an option, because we see Aerith put the flower in Cloud's outfit in one of the trailers, and I didn't know if that meant that it was kind of forced this time around, or if we still have the choice, which means we should still have the option of whether or not to give the flower to Marlene or Tifa, and hopefully Jessie. Unfortunately, the interaction is cut short by a double whammy of interruptions. First, Inner Forces identify Cloud, and Aerith's mysterious harassers return, and while she flees, Cloud, well, let's just say he resists arrest. Here's yet another example of how the game redefines a classic moment. In the original game, Cloud is confronted by Shinra's security, but very quickly escapes onto a moving train. It all takes place in the same area and lasts only a few minutes at most. But in Final Fantasy VII Remake, the confrontation sparks an exhilarating chase up, over, and around the streets of Midgar. The scene still ends with Cloud jumping for the train, but how he gets there is much more intense. And this is actually something we already got to see if you happen to have watched the end cutscene for the demo. We actually see Cloud run around the streets of Midgar fighting a bunch of different Shinra soldiers. A bunch of different variants too, some new stuff. We see a guy with like a big shield and shit. And I've been saying this for years, I'm completely fine with him changing aspects and things of the game or reinterpreting things. Obviously we don't want the main story beats to change, the big important things, but I'm completely fine with seeing some new stuff. And honestly, that's what I want anyways. I would play a one-to-one remake, but I don't necessarily want that either. But anyways, my dudes, that's the video. It's kind of crazy. Both of these articles came out today, not too far apart. I was planning on just doing the PlayStation article, but then like Square Enix dropped that article as well, and I was like, well, I kind of got to talk about both of them. We went over quite a bit in this video, so I just pass off to you guys. What are your thoughts on anything and everything we might have talked about today? If I sound sick, I know the real Nanaki pointed out in yesterday's video, my energy was off a little bit. Dude, I've been feeling like I've been sick for months at this point. I think I got coronavirus before everybody else did. By the way, we are fighting through it. We are making content. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you guys are new and want to did more Final Fantasy VII Remake content. Turn on my notifications. Follow me on Twitter at @dashingdavid. I'm a Discord. Links to my social networks are in the description and in the outro. Later, guys.